The future may turn out to be what Orwell, Huxley, or Bradbury envisioned. Or, hate to say this, it might be a whole lot worse. Hello, my name is Jared Hiebert, and this is the Here I Sit podcast. Before we get into what we will be talking about today, I have to give a shout out to my new favorite Tennessean, Claude Ramsey from the Here I Stand Theology podcast, who gifted me this beautiful shirt. We'll put a link to his podcast in the description. He's doing a lot of good stuff down there in Knoxville, so make sure to check him out. And if you ever find yourself down in Knoxville, make sure to go and attend his church, Reformata, which you can find online on Facebook, etc., etc. So thank you, Claude, for the appearance on your podcast a few weeks ago, and thank you again for this sexy new shirt. On to our business for the day. On this fledgling podcast that we've begun, we have focused on long, in-depth examinations of various topics that are important for the church, and in particular, Covenant Reformed Church in Steinbach, Manitoba, way up in the wild north of Canada. We've also sprinkled in some book reviews, again, for the purpose of encouraging the people at CRC to read good books. After all, as novelist James Joyce once quipped, life is too short to read a bad book. And it's in this vein that we are going to attempt a new kind of look at books. We're calling this simply 3 books, ... If I'm honest, it will probably not always be just 3 books. It might be 2, it might be 4 at some point. But the intent is to take a broad look at 3 books on a given topic or by a particular author, draw some conclusions about that topic, and then move on. The design is to present to you several books and then draw conclusions that will lead you to think more deeply about a topic in light of the books that we discuss. We will look primarily at Christian works, but I also want to, as we will do today, look at books written by non-Christian authors as well. Praise God for his common grace. So with all that in mind as precursor, let's get into our first 3 books edition of this podcast by looking at 3 books on the end of the world as we know it. We all remember the COVID pandemic and all of the government restrictions and subsequent panic that was created in many people around the world. I remember reading an article to which I have recently returned entitled, "Coronavirus is Bringing a Plague of Dangerous Doomsday Predictions." It was written by a secular author and posted on a secular news site, but there were many like it on Christian websites. It's actually quite sad to look back at many of the articles written by Christian pastors and thinkers during that time and read the doomsday type panic within their articles. Now, thankfully, there was a lot of wisdom offered by many pastors and thinkers during that time, but sadly, it often seemed to be drowned out by the abundant and easily accessed craziness. And it was during that time, during those lockout months, that I picked up 3 books on the end of the world that we know it. They're probably familiar to most of you. The first one was George Orwell's 1984. The second one, Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. And the last one, Ray Bradbury, Fahrenheit 451. Now, all of these books are 75 years old or older, and all of them have a different picture of how society will devolve in the future. Each of these books had been on my list of novels to read at some point in my life, and what better time to read these kinds of books than when the world was allegedly coming to an end in the early 2020s. Now, the first of our novels is probably the most well-known. It's 1984 by George Orwell, a dystopian novel written in 1949. The book is set in a totalitarian society ruled by the party and its leader, Big Brother. The main character of the story is a man named Winston Smith. He works at the Ministry of Truth, where it's his job to alter historical records to fit within the party's general narrative. Now, this oppressive regime employs constant surveillance, constant propaganda, and brutal repression to maintain its control over the population. As the book progresses, Winston becomes increasingly cynical with the party. He secretly rebels against the party by pursuing a forbidden love affair with the singularly named Julia, while also seeking the truth about the world around him. Ultimately, his quest for individuality and freedom leads to devastating consequences for him and his love. The novel ends with his rebellion quenched and his love for the party rekindled. Written in the shadows of World War II and the communism which developed out of it, this book highlights the dangers of totalitarianism and the loss of personal autonomy. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley was written almost 20 years before Orwell's novel in the early 1930s. Again, a dystopian novel, but this one's set in a technologically advanced society in the year 2540, where human beings are engineered and conditioned for specific roles, prioritizing stability and consumerism over individuality and emotion. In this world, natural reproduction is replaced by artificial methods, and people are kept docile through the use of a drug called soma, which suppresses any kinds of negative feelings. The story follows Bernard Marx, an outsider who grapples with his dissatisfaction in this seemingly perfect society, and John, a savage raised outside the world state, whose arrival in the story challenges the values and norms within this very controlled environment. Once again, this novel sees a future that is anything but bright, a future where people will come to embrace their oppression because they love the technologies that have turned them into intellectual zombies. It's a future where people can read books, they can learn, they can think, but it's one in which they will lack the desire to do those things. Ray Bradbury wrote Fahrenheit 451 in 1953. It is, again, a dystopian novel, much more in line with Orwell's world in 1984. It's set in a future where books are banned. The title, Fahrenheit 451, coming from the temperature at which paper burns. And there are firemen running around that burn any books that they find. The story follows Guy Montag, a fireman in an unnamed city who becomes disillusioned with his society's anti-intellectualism and the oppressive conformity that comes along with it. As he encounters individuals who challenge his beliefs, including an interesting young woman named Clarice and a free-spirited and rebellious professor, Guy Montag begins to question his role in this world that is devoid of any kind of critical thinking. His journey towards becoming enlightened and rebelling against the oppressive regime ultimately leads him to seek knowledge and freedom. In 2017, Bradbury stated that the book highlights the mind-numbing nature of video media, which to him was television, because it turns people, quote, into morons. The book highlights the importance of knowledge over information and individual thought in the face of censorship. Now, all of these books offer a picture of the author's time projected into the future that give us pause. None of them offer a picture of a future that we would welcome. None of us wants to live in a society in which our every move is monitored by the government. Nor do we want a society in which individuality is abandoned for technologies which amuse us to death. Nor do we want a society in which critical thinking has been almost entirely abandoned. There's one more thing which these books don't offer us: a Christian way of thinking about the future. Each one of them lacks a robust view of God's absolute sovereignty and wise providence. I have often wondered what these books would look like and how their tone would change if each of these authors were solid Reformed biblical Christians who molded the main protagonists into that mold. I dare say the books still may be dark and dire, but amid all of that, there would surely be an encouraging picture of how to live in a future world gone wrong, rather than a nightmarish, hopeless perspective of human existence in a dystopian society at its worst. Now, thankfully, we do have a book that gives us the right way to think in a culture that is contrary to God, and that is the Bible. Regardless of what kind of culture we may find ourselves in, no matter how mad things may be going around us, we always have the Bible to offer us a proper perspective on how to live. I'm drawn to Isaiah chapter 6 when I think about the topics of these books. In that chapter, we read that King Uzziah had just died as king over Israel. Now, this may not sound significant to us, but it would have been extremely troublesome for all of Israel. If you want to know what kind of king Uzziah was and where he took Israel under his reign, you got to go back into 2 Chronicles chapter 26 to find that kind of information. At this point, the detail that we need to know about Uzziah is that from an earthly perspective, he was a very good king, sat on his throne for over 50 years. He had a lengthy reign in which Israel prospered. It was a time of peace and prosperity for the nation as it enjoyed military success, the expansion of the armed forces throughout the region, and undertook many building projects within the nation. Uzziah's death marked the end of an era for Israel, and it would have thrown the nation into upheaval. You see, then when a king died who had reigned for so many years so successfully, the dangers would come almost immediately upon his death. The economy would waver because no one knew what the next king would be like and what his policies would be. Political strife would begin almost immediately as powers within the nation would battle for the control of the next king, who is going to sit on the highest seat in the land. Outside of the nation, enemies would look at Israel as being in a state of flux and may decide that this is the time of their weakness. It's a time for us to attack. It is during times like this that the structures of society can crumble very quickly. And it's during times like these that dark clouds of uncertainty can hang very low over an entire nation. It was in the context of upheaval and uncertainty in the nation of Israel that God revealed himself to the prophet Isaiah. He was worshiping in the temple one day when his vision was lifted beyond the familiar surroundings of the man-made temple, and he was ushered into the very presence of God. During the craziest and most uncertain of times for Israel, Isaiah's eyes were drawn away from the dead earthly king to the true sovereign king. It is vision that has much to teach us. Let me highlight just 3 things. First, God is in control even when everything seems to be out of control. Where is God? Well, he's sitting on his throne. 2 important aspects of the early part of Isaiah's vision. First, God is sitting. He's not pacing. He's not anxiously seeking counsel. He's not rocking back and forth in anxious anticipation of what might happen to his people now that the king has died. Not at all. He's just sitting there. Why? Because God is in complete control of everything. The world is not falling apart. It's completely under his control. All is at peace in heaven, and God is in control, even though it may not look like that on earth. The second thing we see is that God sits on his throne. This is the place of authority and strength and might. The throne indicates the right that God has to rule the world. We do not have to worry that God is not in control or that he might not know what he is doing. God is sitting on his throne. It is high and lifted up. No opposing authority can challenge his rule. No situation can surprise him. No other power can cause him to change his perfect sovereign plan. What an encouraging picture for Isaiah and for us. The sovereign Lord of creation, sitting calmly on his throne, working out his plan. As the psalmist says in Psalm 46, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. Or we could take this psalm into our time and paraphrase it like this. Therefore, I will not fear, though the economy is questionable, though my job security is minimal, though the leader of my own country seems to be of questionable quality, though I worry about the future, I will not fear, for God is my refuge and strength. We might not know what is going on, often don't know what is going on, but God always does, and that is our only place of refuge when the whole world seems to be falling around us. The second thing we learn from Isaiah chapter 6 is that God is near to us. If you have your Bibles, you can look particularly at verse 3. We are told that his glory fills the whole earth. God is not only in complete control and sovereignly reigning from his throne in heaven, but he is also with us. In theological terms, we say that he is transcendent, above, in his throne room, ruling, but he is also immanent, below. He is with us. He is transcendent in majesty and near to his creatures. This gives God's sovereignty a personal touch. God is not so transcendent, so above us that he is out of touch with what we're going through. He is not so far above us in his heavenly place that he is immune to those things that we need. Not at all. He knows what we need before we need it. He knows our struggles. He knows our pain. He knows our worries. He knows our apprehensiveness about the future. And he invites us to share these things with him, to find the solutions to these things in him, and to faithfully submit all of them to his sovereignty and to his plan as he seeks his own glory in us and in our world in ways that we cannot possibly understand. The third thing that we see in Isaiah chapter 6, our biggest need isn't our physical health or our financial health. It is our spiritual health that truly matters. As important as jobs and physical health, savings for the future and, other items of the regular world in which we find ourselves, they pale in comparison to our ultimate need. As Isaiah sees God, he also hears the angels around the throne saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts." Now, this is a problem for Isaiah and for us. See, holiness means many things, but the one that confronts Isaiah most clearly is that God is completely separate from sin. He cannot be in its presence without judging it, without pouring out his wrath against it. This means that Isaiah must die. Isaiah himself recognizes this. He declares, "Woe is me, for I am lost." But God is gracious to him. He sends an angel to him to cleanse Isaiah by touching his mouth with a lump of coal taken from the altar of sacrifice. And in so doing, guilt is removed and sin is atoned. Like Isaiah, we need the grace of God, and we need an atoning sacrifice to take away our sin more than we need anything else in this world. Let's sum this all up. The future may turn out to be what Orwell, Huxley, or Bradbury envisioned. Or, I hate to say this, it might be a whole lot worse. But to the Christian, none of that matters. God has planned the future. He's planned it from eternity past, which means he is already there. Things in the future are already worked out according to the praise of his glorious grace. Things in the future already serve his purposes. So we fear not the future because we embrace God's sovereignty and his love for us in Christ Jesus. Now, before we end, let me return to the 3 books that started this discussion. Should you read them? My answer would be yes. Each of them stimulates thought about the dangers of some of the things that we often blindly accept as valuable, which we really shouldn't. These books will cause you to think deeply, and thinking deeply is always a good thing. One last thing before I go. If you have any topic that you would like covered in our fledgling little 3-book series, leave us a comment below. No guarantees that I will get to it, but the input would be very much appreciated. That's all for now. Until next time.